Hello and welcome to the lecture 568. And I had big doses of quantum physics today, and we've been discussing especially existence, which is a very difficult subject when it comes to quantum physics. It's extremely hard to get rid of existence because it plays an integral part of all our thinking and all our doing, and existence is an integral part of our language. It's always established for every time we say something, that we see something, we do something, we get something. And existence is part of all our literature, all our sayings, and so forth. And still, as we mentioned earlier today, there is a lot of people who don't have existence in their language world. And I came to the idea here when hearing Kalle reading about how do we know about Jesus' existence. That's a similar question, and they got me to understand it's not only a metaphysical question, it's not only an ontological question, it is actually an epistemological question. What is knowledge? That is in the bottom. What do I know? What do I know about Jesus? How can I know about Jesus? And as we know how the world is constructed according to quantum physics, we have a sort of a perception of the whole world. We get information from all kinds, and that information is definitely enormous. And that's how we know things. We can do things. That's a potential for knowledge. We can say that we are like an octopus, and we reach our tentacles into this knowledge base. That's the implicit knowledge. And this is actually the foundation for everything what we know. Whereas the word existence, like something existence without observance in any role, on any of these tentacles. We already know that we have at least 8 tentacles. With quantum physics, those are going to be tripled, quadrupled, and even more so. Exponentially great. We will know so much more of the world when we realize that we have quantum physical perception to the whole world. And there's another reason also. The established line temporality, that sounds a little bit like past and future and now. We know according to the original space, the the Klein bottle, I mean, that those things do not really exist. They are only surface properties. So they don't have any existence. So it doesn't mean that just because something existed in the past, it's unreachable for us. It's not. It's only the idea of past, future, and now that sort of takes away knowledge of something greater, something bigger. It's the model, it's the focal setting that takes it away. And I've said all knowledge has to come from that quantum perception, because all other things are sort of distancing to true knowledge. Outside quantum perception, there can be nothing, because that's the whole world. The whole world comes to us, and it doesn't come to us in the shape of now, present, or past. It comes to us in one piece. I'm actually thinking of the diamond that Julian Barber had as a metaphor for reality. That is world, time, and space, all in one. And that actually means that we can have a perception of the living Jesus. Somehow that perception could never disappear. Even if we relocated that into history, we distanced the whole thing, and all of a sudden it becomes a much more natural thing. And I think that could be the living Jesus in this case. And all other stuff could be a little bit more distant, always taking something in between, that we put a distancing measurement between us now and something that was in the past. And that causes a bit of problems, because then we don't have access to the knowledge, because it's in our bodily system, is implicit in us. One reason for this conclusion is that if we take away existence, we need to have a new epistemology, and that epistemology cannot be based on an existing world. Neither can it be based on an existing world that, so to speak, used to exist. And neither can it be based on something that is going to exist, because those are all included in the diamond. Those are all included in the wholeness. And we do, in that case, if that argument holds, then we do actually have access to the whole lot implicitly through the quantum senses of everything that ever existed. That means I can have personal knowledge of such a person as Jesus by different means, but quantum perception could be the strongest one, because that is now needed to take away existence. I suddenly realize we need something instead. It creates a sort of hole. I didn't realize that before. And I think it could be a good idea, at least for a while, call that thing something, and I'd call it quantum perception. Quantum perception is the perception of the whole world, future, past, and now. And if you take that into consideration, it also makes a lot more sense. Lot more sense why we had existence in the first place. Because we're going to have some sort of proxy. If we lost our senses, we don't have connection to the quantum perception, we need a helping tool. We need some sort of proxy. We need some sort of prosthetic, you could call it even. And that prosthetic is the world. And that prosthetic is what we use in ordinary thinking, in common sense, in ordinary talk, in the life world that we live on a daily basis, as a prosthetic for the quantum perception perceives the whole world. Do we take away this prosthetic, which I suggest we can do now, this lecture, momentarily? Don't do it for good. Could not to be recommended. Could be too scary. But think for a moment, there doesn't exist a world outside there that is beyond or transcendental or under the world I perceive. There's no doubling of the world anymore. There's not world and perception of the world. In a way, it's just the world as a wholeness, undivided, coming in one piece without division, directly, like a gestalt. It is a gestalt, but it's just covering everything. In that case, I perceive the world with quantum perception, regular senses as well, but they need to be quantum made as well, because our usual seeing or our usual approach to the senses are actually connected to existence as well. You see here how everything goes together. The ontology that gets established demands there to be a perception of things, and things demands existence for them to be perceived. So it's an epistemological problem. It's not just ontological. We never mentioned the epistemological problem. How do I have access to the world if there is no such a word as an existing world out there? I can walk around in, discover, we can take notes of it, we can make books about it, we can store information on the internet, and all that. We have a sort of dilemma here, and we need to try some other tools, at least for a while, so we can get over this road bump, whatever you call it. But obviously it needs to be quantum perception. It cannot be anything else. And now it also becomes clearer why it was so absolutely necessary for instance people like Einstein to have an external world. If you don't have any other explanations, what can you do? You don't have a choice really. If he didn't have a world, what would he be theorizing about? What would be the subject? It's a little bit like having a book, but you don't have a storyline. You're not telling a story anymore. And existence is the main character in the drama of Einstein. He can't take away the main character, which is existence. But we're still going to try today. I hypothesize quantum perception. It's the absolute direct perception of the whole world in one bit. Globally, the whole thing coming to us directly. And by these different divisions we have, we start talking about subject and object. We start talking about past. We start talking about future. We inherently make implicitly some divisions. And those have a tendency to obscure knowledge. And somewhere in this inflation of knowledge, inflation of perception, well, it's more than anything actually epistemological inflation, devaluing of the senses, devaluing of the knowing senses, what we know about the world. The second reason that why it have to be this way, I'm thinking once more about the poor Hopi Indians. I say poor jokingly, it's just a bit sarcastical. Nothing poor with them. But they need to have some sort of perception of the world. They get along, they do what they do, they have created society, they have society, they have structures, they even have smaller towns. Everything organized. And that seemed to have happened without them having the world out there to talk about. Their main character is missing. It's still working? No doubt. Isn't that sort of proof for quantum perception? It's the perception that makes it possible to speak about the same thing. And we all implicitly have this perception, just that we normally block it out. It's a little bit like we are, well, either this octopus I mentioned in the beginning, or maybe you can also compare to some sort of, I think this idea is not half bad. was suggested by the son of Rupert Sheldrake, Merlin Sheldrake. So he was talking about mushrooms, and he means that mushrooms have their roots all over the world. They're all connected, and that they have some sort of consciousness. I think that idea could be used when it comes to knowledge as well, to solve the epistemological question. Think about the perception like a web of a mushroom. The mushrooms you see on the ground, they are just a tiny, tiny bit of the whole mushroom. Actually, the mushroom is in the soil, and it's usually enormous. It could weigh millions of tons, because the connecting tissues go all over the earth, and they never really end. They cross all over the world, and they actually have some sort of connection to each other. I think that's a very good metaphor for how knowledge works. So take the thing from the mushroom world, transfer it to epistemology, and think we're all connected to this gigantic web of roots from the mushroom. Call it epistemological mushroom. This is what I call the quantum perception. Therefore, there's no part of the world I don't have access to. Yes, some parts will be more distant. That would be more foggy, not as clear. But we still have a complete world perception in every moment. And then what we do, we block it out. The divisions do have an effect, and the effects are that we block out knowledge, it becomes distant, and in the end it becomes so distant we need to make a proxy. We need to say there's a world existing out there, and in this world there is a relationship between the objects. They construct different things, they make up different things, and then you construct the subject. It's unmovable. That's the origo that arranged all the things in the world. The coordinate system, X, Y, Z, and there are the things localized. They have distances in between, and they're all in this empty coordinate, unchangeable system, often referred to as empty space, or just space. Dead space, you could say too. So now I made some sort of genealogy of the object in empty space, their history, how they in togetherness turned up, and how they are dependent on the different structures, constructions for their existence. And it's also absolutely necessary to have these things. The objects becomes very necessary. They are sort of container for different strands of knowledge coming from the quantum perception of the whole web, distributed, parted out. Every little information bit or knowledge bit is giving its place, and we call those objects. And this could also explain the delay function. There is a delay. We know that our perception of the world is not immediate. It's delayed. It's delayed 0.2 seconds at least, could be more. This delay is the same as the distance. We create a distance to the knowledge, and we can only by a complicated way find back to that knowledge, and that knowledge would be second hand, far away from us. And I was also thinking about some friends. They are really interested in, for instance, their death experience. That's extremely distant from their own lives, their own impending death. and they take that as a very, very distant proof of there being life after this. And that feels so distant, so stop to having any meaning, any great value. It's not bodily experienced anymore. It's very far. And we made all of history far this way, with the distance, far, far away. Say Italian, lontano. Not very close to regular perception. And we create this secondary perception. The secondary perception is me seeing things in the world. We know this is a new development. It didn't happen before. It's not something that the Hopi Indians do. They don't see objects. And here you can also understand how this perception model starts. And with a perception model, we need representation. And with representation, we immediately get private language. You see how it's all interconnected? You could say that the construction of the transcendental world or something like that, you can give it a name even, but it's sort of a birth history or a storyline where the subject is not the main character, it's like one of the side characters, but the main character usually in this day and time is usually the objects themselves. They are the main characters. For some people, a good example could be Daniel Dennett here. Those objects are more important than the subjects, even so important that it's the objects that make up the subjects. So he himself is constructed by these objects that are being perceived, and tries to even erase his own subjectivity, even when it comes to consciousness. I think the interesting part is that most people today seem to think that we are made up of the objects that were previously constructed by this model, necessary model. It's necessary. It's not something you can be without. You can't just say, I don't want to have these constructions, the object, because everything is established. Everything's become reified, heightened up to be objects, and they won't easily give up their value, their importance for us. And I think that could be softened up a bit. It's and by softening those aspects up, we can make the whole world a little bit closer to us. We don't have to talk like we are sitting in a sort of a tube, and the only thing you can hear of the voice is something very, very distant with the other end of the tube, like somewhere here. And you hear existence. It's very far, very far. It's almost a whisper when it comes to your ears. When this quantum perception I just hypothesized is immediate. It's more lively, it's deeper, and it gives safety as true knowledge should do. And probably the Hopi Indians have loads of that, being in the world directly perceiving. And taken that way, it's not, as I said before, they have an equal system, they have a comparable system. In this case, it would almost be like their system is superior in a way, because they directly experience things. Of course, there are historical differences. We're not the same people, we don't share the same web. Our web, our part of the web is different. We can't really transplant them into our web. But they serve very good as an example, I think, of this more encompassing, more intimate, direct connection to the world gives a knowledge that is safer, securer, not as wibbly, and not dependent on that you take one argument and you weigh it to another one, because that always have the wobbliness of the contradiction. If you put one contradiction to another one, the truth will always be dependent on what is not true. So it's interdependency there. And I say that weakens the epistemology of the whole thing. It's not as sure. It's not here. And of course, this could be further expanded into thinking that we actually left this place. We went up in the head, away from the body, away from the body. And that also holds true for this perception model, because in this upward movement that Richard E. Lynn describes, it's literally a movement away from where the perception is. The perception is here. You lose perception when you go. And all of a sudden, body itself, our embodiment, becomes an object in a way. It becomes indirectly. Body sends signals to us. And all of a sudden something eerie, alien is coming over our existence. It does no longer feel true. It feels like a falsity. And I'd say it's exactly this falsity that led Plato to look for the truth somewhere hidden, somewhere away, somewhere transcendent, not of this world. Truth is hidden, it's not present, somewhere else, and you cannot even reach it. Maybe he tried to reach it all his life and he gave up in the end and said that maybe I'll get there when I die and see into the ideal forms. But in an obvious sense, when you look at the objects that he sort of sends away, like children he doesn't want to have anything to do with, already the objects have lost their practical value. They're not something for him. It's something he looks at only. They stop making sense, because if I use something, I'm intimate with it. Like the car I'm driving now, it's not something that I look at, it's something I am together with. And that's a very, very big difference. Very big difference. And that's not evident in the world of ideas of Plato. Things are nothing for him. Vessel to drink from is just a vessel to look at. You don't do the drinking with that. It's not something that you fill up with water or wine or whatever it is. You just look at it passively, and it has its perfect form. And for some mad reason, that perfect form is perfect in itself. There's no mentioning of function, because obviously a perfect vessel will be the best vessel to put wine into. One who doesn't leak, the one is more easy to handle, the one that is more stable, doesn't fall over. All those factors, maybe it's very good to look at as well. And none of those very important factors coincide with what he say, perfectness. Perfectness is something completely different. And what is it? Well, we don't know. We never know what he meant by perfectness, because he's talking about some other world that doesn't exist. He's not talking about some world that could exist. He's talking about a world that can never exist. I mean, that is the main obstacle. In some weird way, existence is the things that doesn't exist, because they're not part of perception. To exist is be part of perception, nothing else. There's another way of saying perception, another way of doing things with things. Perception is active. It's not a standstill process. You just sit like a coach potato and look in front of you, and nothing is taking place in yourself. Everything is happening outside of yourself. Maybe that's one of the reasons those ambigrams are so fantastic. People think they're so fantastic, including me. Fantastic. And maybe that they're not exceptions. Not there. Maybe they're not that extraordinary. Maybe they just have a trait that the whole world has. It's just so much more obvious when it comes to these things. That the whole world is an ambigram, rather. And what you drag into the world, that's going to react with the world and become the world. And this world is so much more encompassing, greater, more diversified. It's not a world that every feature is erased, more or less, put into shape, universalized, generalized, deadened, becoming the objects nowhere to be found, nowhere to feel, nowhere to do anything with them, nothing for you, not possible to perceive, nothing. No wonder here he sounds so depressed sometimes, Plato. Not only him. Take modern physicists like Jacques Monod, famous molecular biologist or chemical molecularist. I can't even pronounce it. Microbiologist, call him. It's easy to pronounce. He said he's looking out in the universe and he can see no purpose whatsoever. It's completely lacking of every purpose. Why is that? Well, he's just looking out in the perception. He's just an observer, and nothing in the universe is anything for him. Can't use anything. Just start looking at things that they are completely dead. Take a shovel, take a fork, take a car, take a train, even take people, like the cartoons. People, I don't know if they're consciousness. You look at everything like it's completely dead. And if you do that, there is no wonder on earth you would start paint a depressing worldview, as he did. But he caused it himself, because he already from the outset he decided that the focal setting should be the things are 400 for him, at a distance, having nothing to do with it. Of course it gets boring. It's like saying there's a fantastic game going on, some sort of Monopoly, and you just can sit besides that Monopoly, not partaking in any way. Just look at the game. And this is what happens when you accept this idea of observer, the theater observer, the Greek idea. We are just observing the world. We're not part of it. We're not actively engaged in the world. Things are just happening to us. You can just look at them. That is in itself depression, not being active. And then you can take that to another field, take that to cognition, because you think the world is out there because of the constructs I mentioned earlier. How will cognition be? You're going to be passive as well. I just go and look at things. I don't want to do anything more active. I'm not going to do anything to memorize anything. That's an offense. Nobody's going to force me to memorize anything. Just going to look at the things, and it's going to get stuck in my head because of this idea I have of automatic representation. I'm sitting in theater. It's almost like you're saying, "Whoa, hey, I paid the theater tickets. They were dear. What was the price of the theater tickets? Well, it was the price of my whole life. I gave up my life. I sit in the theater and I just look at my whole life passing by, no longer involved in it. I don't do anything to memorize anything. I don't repeat after 24 hours. I don't repeat after 36 hours. That should come natural to me. That's what I deserve. I paid a theater ticket. I gave up my life for this." Don't you see a problem here? It's like passivity is built into this whole world idea. You're not actively doing anything else. The representation theory is about passivity. You look around in the world. You don't do anything with your perception. It's a deadened perception. And I said this hypothesized new ability of human beings, supersense, the quantum perception. I think that is also different in quality. It's a doing of some sort. You do something when you perceive, you construct something. It has something you've forgotten. You once constructed the world. You observed the world. You made the superposition collapse. But you've forgotten that. And now you look passively at what you yourself have created by your attitude, by your opinions, by your insight. And instead of enjoying it, you say it's not part of you, it's outside of yourself and has nothing to do with yourself. This apathy is built into the system. The passivity goes hand in hand, sitting still, just looking. I'm not criticizing sitting still, it's more a metaphor for what it is to be a passive observer. Of course you can sit still and still be active. But is this you don't do anything with your mind. You just have a mind. And I think that's the reason that we think today we are constructing things. Something we will them. Instead of this active process when you observe the things and you can get better at it. And you actively choose which thoughts that should come to the forefront. And that's an activity. It has an intention. Everything gets an intention by that. And the only way of ridding the world of intention, meaning fullness, it's by first you have to construct it, because there's no other way. You have to construct the world. You have to let the superposition collapse. And then you can go into to say, this is all passive. Within yourself. And in the end you're gonna perceive your own makings, same things all over again. You're even going to say to yourself, this is all the same. They don't have any difference built into them. Those are the objects. So it's like I wouldn't say immunological disease, but it does have internal traits. It is something you do yourself. Yes, you who are listening, you already created the world at some stage, and now you will not acknowledge your own creation. You say it's outside yourself. And what you say is, I'm passively looking at it. You had never ever anything to do with me from the beginning. You convince yourself this is the case. So what you need to do is go back to see, how does it start? I think the best way would go back to how have we historically developed. We know objects have a history. Objects have not always existed. They have construction date. The division between subject and object has slowly developed. Slowly, it's been taking a lot of time. It didn't happen overnight. And it was a consorted sort of action between individual people and the people around them, including the world and content perception. It needed to be some agreement, but first and foremost, you needed to give something up in yourself. Take a part of yourself, reject it, marginalize it, and turn it into objects. Some sort of devalued reality. Pieces of knowledge, pieces of perception, pieces, as I earlier called epistemology, and you devalue that. And you say those are just objects. You devalue that even more by saying they have a definite distance to me temporally, like they were in the past. Every perception in ordinary talk is delayed. We try to imitate that in our own system by delaying the whole thing. But there's also distance between you and the object. Space distance. Temporal distance or space distance. And I'd say there's also a knowledge distance. Because you say that the only possibility to have any knowledge of the world is by going complicated way, by looking somewhere for knowledge that's lost in history somehow. It's lost in history. The history loses itself because it's distancing in action. And here you have a double distancing in effect from space and time, saying because of the subject-object division needs to be away from you time-wise, away from you space-wise. Therefore, you start saying that knowledge needs to be away from that as well. And you say in the end that knowledge is distanced. That knowledge becomes very, very wobbly, very insecure. It doesn't give you the sustenance that you need. It doesn't give you the foundation to stand on, to know 100% be sure the things you want to know. And you don't want to be half sure. And I take this just as an example that I possibly have nothing to do with quantum physics in my term, but living eternally. And you take this lousy evidence book that somebody wrote and said they came back from death. That's so distancing. I can't even see how that could have an effect in your life. And it's so untrustworthy already from the start because it's distancing into distancing. That doesn't make for security. That doesn't make for having your 2 feet firmly on the ground and really knowing what you're doing. It's not action related either. And this idea of proven knowledge by proxy somewhere else, by authority, and as I mentioned earlier, by double-sided objective observation, where you eradicate all traits of subjectivity, sort of clean the world from that messy, horrible, warm stuff. The body is warm, full of liquids, dirty. Plato probably thought, get away from the dirty body, get away from the dirty world with all its exceptions. It's not made of geometrical forms. I don't want to have anything to do with it. I better give it up. A little thinking on the way to Skara. I say thank you very much, and I bid you a pleasant afternoon. Cheers.